Long before the American interior was settled by Europeans, a busy seaport thrived in coastal Georgia. That port was called Sunbury. Once a bustling center of activity, today Sunbury sleeps. Not a single original building of the old town remains. This is the story of the life and death of one of American history's forgotten places, Sunbury, Georgia. Because there are no ruins to remind us of its past, most people have forgotten the old town of Sunbury. Yet this spot, now covered by trees and shrubs, was once a thriving cultural center.
It's hard to stand here today and try and comprehend the reality that was here 200 and some odd years ago. It was a city of many streets, fine homes, wide verandas, city squares, a very compact community. You wonder what it was like, and I'm sure I'm not the first person that's ever stood over there and wished for the opportunity to be able to step back through the portals of time, even just for a short period of time, to walk the streets of old Sunbury, to get a real image of what it was like and what the people were like.
Sunbury was the main port for the prosperous Midway district in coastal Georgia. In its heyday, the town consisted of 496 lots and 3 town squares. This district produced more historically important people than any other place in Georgia. 3 signers of the American Declaration of Independence were connected to Sunbury. Lyman Hall owned a home here. Button Gwinnett lived on the offshore island of St. Catharines. And George Walton, the state's 3rd signer, was held prisoner here when the town was captured by the British during the American Revolution.
There was certainly a cosmopolitan flavor to Sunbury in its pre-revolutionary days. Lots of important people, important to the state, and in some cases important on a national level, had Sunbury connections, came and went from the town. Other Georgia governors, military leaders, U.S. senators had Sunbury connections.
Authors came out of there, scientists came out of there, politicians came out of there, inventors came out of there. I believe Golding, the inventor of the sewing machine, was from there. Sort of a remarkable settlement in many ways.
Before the American Revolution, Sunbury and nearby Savannah were Georgia's busiest seaports. In 1773, 56 ocean-going vessels entered and cleared the customs house in Sunbury.
Sunbury rivaled Savannah in its early years because of the amount of cargo that was moved through the city, through the port, a number of ships that were in and out of here. It became kind of a friendly competition between the 2 cities as they each vied to attract shipping in there.
On this site, 4 large wharves once greeted travelers from around the world. Huge ships docked here to buy, sell, and trade goods.
Of course, being a port city, you had access to not only goods from all around the world, but news and information. News traveled very slowly at that time, and every time a ship came rolling in the harbor from some faraway port across the ocean somewhere, people were very interested in the news of what was going on in Europe or the Mediterranean or in England. The prosperity that Sunbury enjoyed was growing when the revolution came along and kind of put a stop to it.
C.C. Jones, in his history, says that on the eve of the revolution that the Midway district contained 1/3 of the wealth of the entire colony.
While the eventual death of the old town is attributed to many factors, historians agree that its decline began during the American Revolution. Fort Morris was designed to protect Sunbury from attackers. The fort was an enclosed earthwork, with walls extending about an acre. Soldiers stood behind these walls and fired cannons at approaching enemy ships. Tragically, however, Fort Morris would ultimately fail to protect the town from advancing British troops. On November 25, 1778, more than 500 British troops closed in on Sunbury. British Colonel L.V. Fuser ordered the Americans to surrender Fort Morris. In one of the great moments in American history, a defiant Colonel John McIntosh responded, "We, sir, are fighting the battles of America. As to surrendering the fort, receive this laconic reply: come and take it." Intimidated by this defiance, the British did not come and take Fort Morris. Instead of attacking, British troops retreated to build their forces. At Sunbury, history records that the first British invasion of Georgia failed. This reprieve was short-lived, however. 6 months later, a large fleet of British ships anchored off the coast. Bolstered by reinforcements, British troops marched unopposed into Savannah. While Savannah succumbed to this attack, another wave of British forces set out from St. Augustine, Florida, to crush Sunbury. Overwhelmed, Sunbury's 200 defenders were forced to surrender their town. Sunbury was the last American post in coastal Georgia conquered by the British during the Revolutionary War.
Because of the battles fought there and because of the British partial destruction of the town when they evacuated Sunbury, there was very little left. The inhabitants had mostly scattered. The buildings were probably either destroyed, burned, or decayed, and there had to be a rebuilding. And because of a variety of factors, political and economic, the town did not come back as a commercial center.
After the Revolution then, the city entered a period of time where they tried to recover a lot of the lost prosperity, but began a steady decline from that point in time. Around the turn of the 19th century, in the early 1800s, Sunbury began to lose its economic importance.
In 1788, during a brief period of recovery, the Sunbury Academy was established. The Academy was one of the best schools in coastal Georgia, and its most prominent teacher was Reverend William McWhirr. A close friend of George Washington, McWhirr frequently visited Mount Vernon. But even the temporary success of this institution could not slow Sunbury's decline. The Academy closed permanently, and today Reverend McWhirr's grave is located here in the Sunbury Cemetery. This cemetery is the most tangible reminder of the old town.
The cemetery speaks to us of another time and other people, and it's one of many very haunted places in Liberty County and coastal Georgia that you can't help but visit and cast thoughts back to who these people are and the reality that they lived here.
Following the Revolutionary War, some people continued to live in this lovely area, but most were forced out by severe hurricanes in 1804 and 1824. Yellow fever and malaria epidemics also struck the fading town. Soon weeds and grass crept in to reclaim the once busy streets and lanes. Trees grew up and wildlife moved in. Today, it's difficult to imagine that such an important town once existed here. The last remaining building was the Scriven House. It stood until the early 1960s, when it too was finally torn down.
Sunbury is now being reborn in a very different sort of way. The site is now once again being built upon and being used by individuals who are choosing to make their homes there. So the cycle comes around again. But the history of what literally took place there is important.
You have to use your imagination today if you visit the town of Sunbury and realize that while folks retire down here now to enjoy the coastal breezes and the beautiful scenery of live oak trees and Spanish moss, that at one time this was a thriving business center, seaport for coastal Georgia. People
who lived here had their reality here and have gone, and other people take their place, and just as there will come a time when we're long gone and forgotten, other people will stand here and probably wonder not only what Sunbury was like during the colonial period of time, but what it was like in the 1990s.